If you get really invested in the NES library, it's hard not to notice the weird number of golf games on the system and an even weirder number of Formula 1 racing games. In total, there are 8 Formula 1 racing games, depending on whether or not you would count Micro Machines, since that game uses Formula 1 looking cars in an imagined environment. I'll probably include that one in its own video someday, so that really leaves us with 7. And since no one wants to hear me ramble about 7 Formula 1 racing games back to back, I've divided the list into ones with a driver's name in the title and ones without. Today we'll be looking at the 4 games endorsed by the drivers themselves, including Al Unser Jr.'s Turbo Racing, Michael Andretti's World GP, Nigel Mansell's World Championship Racing, and Danny Sullivan's Indy Heat. Start your engines, and let's see what's up. Al Unser Jr.'s Turbo Racing presents 3 modes out of the gate. Time Trial Mode A lets you race against other cars in a practice mode, Mode B lets you practice without other cars around, and World Grand Prix Series is a real-deal campaign of 16 championship tracks. In practice mode, you can pick any of the 16 available tracks to compete in. The track variation here is rather deep, each with its own length, difficulty, and environment, and as you can see here, you can race on tracks from all over the world. The game allows you to customize your car a little bit. You can assign points to speed, acceleration, durability, suspension, turbo capacity, and even the speed of the pit crew. Adjusting these categories will have a direct and noticeable effect on your car's handling abilities and overall performance and speed. Controlling the car is simple. A for gas, B for brake. Your only option is for a manual transmission, so you'll have to get the hang of shifting gears. And it wouldn't be Al Unser Jr.'s Turbo Racing unless some turbo were involved. So, just remember, on straight stretches, to hold in the up and A button simultaneously to goose it and use your limited turbo stock. The amount of turbo you have is shown in the bottom right of the dashboard. You can play as Unser Jr., which maxes out your stats and makes the game extremely simple. If you start as your own racer, the game can be frustratingly difficult as you try to build up your car. Graphically, the game looks pretty nice. Racing does feel fast, and the occasional slight rise and fall of elevation as you zip along at 230 miles per hour feels smooth. Chevrons on the side of the road give you just enough heads up about an approaching turn, and the game isn't too punishing if you enter with too much momentum. If you get the hang of braking a little as you enter and flooring it as you leave a turn, you should be fine. The game does save after each race, and hey, if you need some advice, Al has you covered. Before each race, you can pop by for a thumbs up and a reminder that Valvoline exists. These 2 ladies in the background are Valvoline queens, I suppose. So much Valvoline. Valvoline, 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 Valvoline. And if you're at all curious about Al Unser Jr., he was born in Albuquerque, won the Indy 500 twice, won 2 IRC championships, and is in the Motorsports Hall of Fame. Alright, let's see what Michael Andretti was up to with his game. Michael Andretti's World Grand Prix is similar in a lot of ways to Al Unser's game. For starters, all the controls are the same here, except Andretti doesn't believe in fun things like turbo. He does believe in skill though, because you're going to need it to compete in this one. If you think you can just jump into the Grand Prix and have a good time, you would be mistaken. I would advise you to actually consider the practice mode before you put rubber to the road in the Grand Prix mode. You will need to become one with your vehicle, anticipate the turns with great accuracy, and understand how to utilize downshifting and braking to your advantage, and you must have the ability to interpret the degrees of a turn ahead of time, as it were second nature. Grand Prix mode pits you against other Formula 1 racers in 9 levels of competition, each level consisting of 16 courses, so to beat the game requires completing 144 races. This is about 30 hours of gaming if you're decent at it. That is quite time-consuming, so passwords are an absolute necessity. Unfortunately, the passwords are very gnarly looking and up to 16 characters long, often including symbols, so be ready for that. On top of the sheer number of races, another reason the game is so beefy is that the courses sometimes require you to race up to 10 laps, and you must qualify in order to race at all. You can't skip qualifying, and you can't phone it in because you can fail to qualify, unlike most racing games. There's no way to skip qualifying to say, hey, just start me in the last place, I'll make up the ground. Here, if you don't qualify, you don't race at all, and you're stuck watching Andretti and the boys complete the course by themselves. After that, only then do you move to the next event and attempt to qualify again. You have to complete 5 laps, with at least one coming in under a certain time in order to qualify. It takes forever. When it comes to presentation, Andretti's game is not great. While each of the 16 tracks here do have their own look and feel, your car is very tiny, and nearly half the screen is a map of the track. The part of the screen that shows the action is zoomed so far out that the track's width is only about half the width of the screen, giving you a very tight play area and no room for error, especially when you need to pass other racers. The cockpit is also overladen with fake doodads and switches. Really all you need to see is what gear you're in, and if your RPMs are in the red. Where Unser's game cleverly used signs and track infrastructure to give a heads up about turns, the draw distance is so poor here that wouldn't work, so instead a little arrow will pop up on screen to give you a turn notification. If you're used to more arcadey type racers that are forgiving with turns, like Unser's game was, then you're in trouble here in Andretti's game. This game's turning mechanic takes a bit of getting used to. The number of times you tap left or right on the D-pad sets the car at a specific turn angle, so when you come to a turn, you'll need to get the car at a precisely correct angle to make it through. It's one of those things that is easier to understand when you experience it, and this is something that stands out about this game compared to the others in this video, and feels weird. The room for error between navigating a turn seamlessly or spinning out in the grass is minuscule. I'm trying to tell you that the game is tough. Easily the toughest on today's list. Your ability to succeed depends heavily on your ability to master shifting in and out of turns and getting those turn angles right, which is one thing to nail in practice and another to pull off with other cars sharing the track with you. Not to mention, if you're set on beating the game entirely, you have a lot of racing to do. None of that is to say it's a bad game. It's flawed in that it lacks a lot of ease of life features, but it is quite competent as a racing game that requires some practice to get good at. Michael Andretti is the son of Mario Andretti, who is not related to Nintendo's Mario, but was a racer himself. Michael Andretti won a championship in 1991 and holds the record for the most laps led in an Indy 500 without winning it. Poor guy. Let's see what's up with Nigel Mansell's game. Mansell's game gives you the 8-bit cockpit view you've been wanting. No more staring at the back end of your own car, now you can see your 2 front tires and tons of pavement. This game has a great sense of speed and is quite impressive looking on the NES. Like Unser's game, turns are indicated by chevron signs, and you can even glimpse at your side mirrors, which actually do come in handy for when the pesky competition tries to pass you. Unlike Andretti's game, where the map was most of the screen, Nigel here has opted for a pointlessly tiny map that's nearly impossible to see. You can customize your car a bit here and make decisions about your transmission, tires, and wings. The manual does a good job of explaining how each option will affect your car during a race. And as you race, you can see the condition of your tires degrade over time by keeping an eye on the meter in the lower right. This will provide you a good indication of when you should stop in for a pit stop to get those switched out. Once again, just like in the previous 2 games covered today, there are 16 tracks here from around the globe, and you'll need to complete the World Championship Tour with the most points in order to win the Cup, as Nigel Mansell did in his triumphant 1992 season. There are passwords to give you a break between races, and thankfully, this game will allow you to skip the qualifying lap if you're lazy like me, and let you get right into the racing, so Nigel respects your time a lot more than Andretti did. There are 3 main modes to choose from. You can race a single race, race for the Cup in a full season, or select Improve with Mansell, which is a practice mode, but I don't really understand why that is denoted with the giant letter L. Maybe he's calling you a loser here and is telling you that you need to improve? Anyway, it's a good idea to try this out, as it gives you the ability to race on each track without any other cars around, so you can get a feel for each before committing to a full season. And as you go, our pal Nigel and his sweet mustache will appear on screen to give you some tips and keep you company. Nigel even provides an indicator on screen of where the driving line is on the track, which shows you the most efficient route to take. If you go the way of the Nigel and become a competent driver, the game might eventually become easy and you'll get bored from being alone in first place for long stretches of time. This didn't really happen to me, but I'm just saying it's possible. Coming out in 1993, very late in the NES lifespan, and nearly 3 years after the first 2 games in today's video, Nigel Mansell's game gets a lot right. In addition to looking great, it feels good to play, and the parallax movement of the objects in the distance is well done. The pit stop animation is also kind of fun, as you see this young man showing off his toned forearms for you, while his bros change out your tires. Hey, good job guys. The music loops ad nauseum, and the sound design during races isn't any better, as you'll need to endure a squeaky tire sound at literally every turn. Thankfully, you can turn the music completely off from the main menu, as if the developers already knew they hadn't done anyone any favors by offering a 3-second loop as the main theme. In all, this one is probably my favorite game of the ones in this video. On top of looking good and playing smoothly, it's also more forgiving, which I personally appreciate, especially after spending time with Andretti's game. A bit about Nigel Mansell. As you might expect, he and his mustache are both from England, and he won a F-1 championship title in 1992 and a kart IndyCar title in 1993. He is also in the Motorsports Hall of Fame. His mustache is such a part of his persona that his Wikipedia page lists the 2 times he shaved it off during his career. Next up, Danny Sullivan's Indy Heat. Where the other 3 games today put their eggs in the simulation basket, Danny Sullivan's Indy Heat offers a different approach. The game is strongly akin to Super Sprint, an extremely common Tengen racing game where players control tiny cars from a top-down view, and because it's a rare developed game and Trade West published game, it has a strong DNA link to the Super Off-Road racing game. It also has jolly menu music that reminds me of Paperboy. Because it's not a simulation game that forces you to race several laps on 16 tracks around the globe like the others, this game has 9 tracks and they're all super short, taking a little over a minute to complete each entire race. The entire game takes 15 minutes to finish. Unlike the others in this video, Indy Heat is actually an arcade port. The arcade original had 14 tracks and a neat look and feel to it as far as arcade racing games go, and the port here to the NES is mostly fine. If you have a 4 score, you and 3 friends can race against each other, and since the track is on a single screen, there's no need for split screen. Where the single player mode for this game is pretty easy and somewhat lackluster, the multiplayer component really ratchets up the fun potential. You start by entering your initials and selecting your racer from a catalog of very tiny heads. You start with some cash to upgrade your vehicle either with more turbo, better brakes, better tires, engine upgrades, and gas mileage, or you can ask Danny what he thinks you should do. This is fishy. Since you race against Danny, why should I trust the competition? If you play single player, you're the red car and Danny is the yellow car and will always stay near the front. If you play with 4 players, Danny is still the 5th car you'll race against. The only things you'll need to get adept at here is navigating the turns from a top-down perspective and knowing when to hit your turbo boosts. You can sometimes take an ill-timed turn and smack into a wall, becoming stuck for a second and lose valuable seconds. Getting a good feel for the controls in order to navigate around the track without smashing off walls is crucial for success. After each race, you'll earn some money to put toward upgrades, and after 9 races, if you manage to outpoint our guy Danny, you win the cup. The game doesn't stop here though, or ever. You can just keep going and going. Interestingly, all of the tracks in the NES port are renamed from the original, and while this is called Indy Heat, there is no Indianapolis racetrack. It was renamed the Trade West Speed Bowl and moved to Houston, Texas. So that's weird. In all, Danny Sullivan's Indy Heat is by far the easiest game on the list, and obviously the most different in terms of gameplay. There's no real bonus in playing this one over something like Super Sprint or Super Off-Road unless you opt for the chaotic bump and grind multiplayer experience, which really helps this one out. As for Dan the Man, he's a Louisville, Kentucky native who was actually a cab driver in New York City before he chose a racing career. He won the Indy 500 in 1985 and won 1 championship title in 1988. Well, that's it. 4 F1 racing games and 4 F1 racers to go with them. There's not really a bad game of the bunch. It really depends on what you're trying to get out of the experience. We'll dive into the other F1 racing games another day, but for now, that's gonna do it. As always, just remember, Valvoline. Valvoline, 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 Valvoline. And thanks for watching.